Hey real estate nerds, this is Alex Yoder with Pro Tip Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. And today I want to talk about one of the biggest challenges that I see imposed by 1098. Now there are quite a few challenges imposed by House Bill 1024-1098, but I want to talk about one of the biggest ones, one of the biggest hurdles, particularly for property managers. Now this is for landlords as well to be aware of, but for property managers, this is one of the biggest challenges. And I think it's something that we need to be conveying and explaining to our clients. So let's say you're in a situation where you are trying to work with the tenant to see what they're planning on doing. Are you renewing? Are you vacating? Whatever, whatever. And in most cases, landlords require tenants to give a 30-day notice. There are some cases that require a 60. The legality of that is kind of a little ambiguous based on advice that we've received from counsel, but let's just say it's a 30-day notice. Well, there was a law passed previously that basically limits the recourse that landlords can impose on tenants if they give a late notice. So even if you have a 30-day notice, as an example, your ability to bill them if they give you a late notice is very nuanced and tricky, and it has to be tied to actual damages, this kind of thing. While 1098 in most cases requires a landlord to give a 90-day notice, assuming it's a lease of 12 months or an occupancy period of 12 months or more. And so you're going to end up in situations where their lease ends in July. It's now the middle of July, and I cannot get these people to tell me what they're planning on doing. And I don't know if I want to allow them to just continue in a default month-to-month for an extended period of time. And so maybe I presented a lease to them and I'd given them 10 or 15 days or whatever our attorneys are advising. And now I'm non-renewing for failure to sign or failure to renew the agreement, which is one of the reasons that you can non-renew people. But that non-renewal now would be for basically the end of October, right? And so, sorry about that. So end of October. So now we're bleeding into a less favorable time of year, and we are going into a default month-to-month status for a few months because we can't get the tenant to make a decision or to sign the agreement or whatever it is. Now, some landlords or even some property managers may say, well, why wouldn't you just present it over 100 days out so that you can give them a 90-day for the end of their lease, for the end of July? Well, the reasoning for that is, number one, if you reach out 4 months out, 5 months out, I can tell you that most people are not going to have any clue what they're planning on doing, and they're not going to convey to you what they're planning on doing until much closer to when their lease ends. There may be some that are really good planners that'll go ahead and sign that early, but in my opinion, most people will have no idea or will be difficult to get an answer from. And so what are you going to do if you don't have their signature that early on the lease? You're just going to blanket non-renew everybody? I don't think that's a good way to handle business, because now you may end up in situations where you're non-renewing people that weren't really bad tenants. You just wanted an answer and you couldn't get one. And so now you're kind of, in my opinion, kind of overcorrecting and doing sort of a blanket approach and just non-renewing anybody who doesn't sign that early. And in my opinion, for property managers, I don't think that's in the client's best interest. I think in most cases, that decent or good tenant is going to renew. They just need a little bit more time to make that decision. So this approach of a blanket non-renewal, when you're reaching out to them 4 or 5 months out so you can have that 90 days to actually give them notice for the end of their lease, I think is not only impractical, but on average is not in the client's favor. So with that in mind, again, we're going to end up in situations where we are inside of that 90-day window and we are giving a notice of non-renewal that actually bleeds beyond the end of the existing lease and forces at least a brief month-to-month period. With that in mind, I would recommend that you speak with your legal counsel about maybe positioning a month-to-month fee. A month-to-month fee that is written and explained and described in your lease agreement if it defaults into a month-to-month status. That way, not only you're not stuck with the existing rate, and maybe your taxes and insurance went up like everybody, and you were trying to get a rent increase that was reasonable, and tenant won't sign, so you can't just blanket increase the rent based on what the lease says. They have to sign that lease. So maybe you want to have some language in there to actually charge a month-to-month fee so you can cover your increased costs, at least until something's figured out. But two, also that fee could offer some incentive for the tenant to actually tell you what they're planning on doing, either give a notice of non-renewal or sign. The other thing is that we may be in situations where we're negotiating with the tenant, like maybe it's the middle of June, and we're like, well, shoot, I don't want to give a notice for the end of September. That's kind of sucks. So we talk to the tenant, and we tell them, hey, if you're not planning on staying, please give your notice for the end of July. And that would be ideal. And in many cases, that is very much negotiable. We've had many situations already where tenants were like, oh, I'm so sorry, I am leaving, let me give you my notice for the end of July, and we are good to go. But there are a couple where we are being forced to give a 90-day, and it has to be for one of those 6 compliant reasons described in the bill, and that 90-day bleeds into a less favorable time of year. In my opinion, that is just the nature of the business here in Colorado, now that this bill has passed. I don't see a better way of handling it other than just doing it on a case-by-case basis and trying to negotiate the best that you can. But understand, as landlords, that there will be situations where you bleed into a month-to-month default status based on the 90-day notice requirement, and it may bleed into a less favorable time of year. And I think that risk is better on average than doing a blanket notice of non-renewal super early, which I don't think is really enforceable anyway, based on advice that we've received from our counsel. But it's all very tricky, it's all very messy, it's all very challenging. Just be aware of what kind of you're getting into and the risks that you have as landlords, because these things are tricky and they are real. And I'm sure in a year from now, I'll have some different advice, but that's what we're seeing right now. Hopefully that was helpful. We'll see you next week.